It was still early, but sleep eluded him as Tom laid in bed. Even with class suspended for the day, and Miv dozing beside him, his mind was alert, leaving him restive. There's so much that can go wrong. Adam and his wives would probably have shut me down hard if this looked like a disaster. So why can't I stop feeling like I missed something? Anything? It's meaningless to try and prepare for everything, and maybe I am just talking myself into paralysis. It's counterproductive. What was that Shorvanti saying? Stir deep waters to catch big fish. This shell was all of that in a nutshell. There wouldn't be room for doubt tomorrow, when any hesitation could throw off the timing and ruin the plan. This was all about nobility, royalty. Audacity would be part of the window dressing. Tomorrow, the bigger the inconsistency, the bolder the lies. It would be a time to run roughshed over any obstacles and get out the other side, dismissing any gaps in their cover. Hopefully Burdin's nerves would hold out. But that was tomorrow. At least for today, he could lay in next to Miver and try to relax. Fishing out his AirPods, he linked them to his Omnipad and laid back. There would be time for making breakfast soon, before going about a pantomime of their daily routine together. He knew he'd be hoping she didn't worry too much, and hoping even more that his worries didn't show. On any other occasion, Miv and Shalea would be there at his side. Miv had an idea of what was happening now. It had been necessary to keep Leia in the dark. It went against the grain, but there'd be one more risk he didn't want to take. At least he had today, and he'd do the best he could with the time he'd been given. Feeling the warmth of her beside him, Tom sat up a bit and listened to her sleep. She hadn't liked staying behind, but Miv was Shorvanti, and this was an operational requirement set down by Indara and Adam. She said she understood, and perhaps she did. If Miv suspected that he'd had a hand in that particular operational requirement, she'd never let on. Tom pulled up his music list, thumbed it over to random, and hit play.
Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Everybody rolls with their fingers crossed. Everybody knows the war is over. Everybody knows that the good guys lost.
High Advocate Opimea Potak settled down for the meeting with mild dissatisfaction, but a wealth of interest. Naturally, at home in her rooms at the Ministry of Justice, visiting the Ministry of the Interior was a nod to security. Besides, sometimes it was necessary to swim in each other's circles. Regardless, it was a brisk morning. The sun was not yet up, and a hint of chill winter was in the air. She heartily approved of rising before dawn and made a habit of it. It was good for the mind and body, and after breaking your fast with a mollusk or two, you were ready to face the day. Mind, the average Shorvanti wasn't up and about yet, and even her assistant wouldn't be in the office for hours, but this time of day was ideal for awkward meetings. To her credit, Lorem Raylin, the Minister of the Interior, never appeared anything other than alert. It was a quality of the woman rather than the species, but that made her a pleasure to work with. She was an affable hostess, polite, genteel, and generous. She was also the most efficient, ruthless, and bloodthirsty woman Opimea had ever known. The two of them had met far more frequently than was customary in the last few weeks, but needs must while the Empress was away. Minister Raylin was loath to exercise her options, with the state of the Empress's will being indeterminate due to circumstances, but news was circulating. It must, perforce, be filtering into the Interior's web, just as it was leaking up through the wellspring of her own offices. The nobility was growing anxious in the Empress's absence, though no more than should reasonably be expected. News of Princess Calandra's death had radiated out across the Imperium, like a stone tossed into a still pond. Even as the first ripples of the news were reaching out past the Imperium, into the other polities of the galaxy, the Empress created more with her departure on Shamatol's Walk, taking the court to reclaim some token of her daughter, however symbolic, and bringing it home to cast into the sun. as religious customs went, it had a sensibly austere quality to it. She waved away Lorem's offer of a second cup of sopka. The tart beverage of vinegared fish juice was a bracing start to any day, but they had business to attend to, at least with their third arrived. In the meantime, Oppenmeyer considered her hostess. Their last meeting together, Lorem had been on edge. Under her hand, the interior was not prepared to act in the choice of a future heir. Not yet, at least. The death of Princess Satora had placed Lorem under considerable strain. When the Empress returned, there would be an accounting. If the Empress did not return, there would be rather more. As peers, Oppenmeyer felt she was as close to knowing Lorem's mind as any being in the galaxy. Their officers worked together, net and spear, and if they privately agreed Camaldry was unsuitable to take the throne, she was just as certain Lorem would not exercise her power a moment before it became necessary for the good of the dynasty. That said, Camaldry was patently unsuitable. By necessity, a ruler needed to remain aloof from feelings of camaraderie with others, but to be entirely free of such feelings for one's fellow beings was to be a monster. However lamentable the events that brought such a streak of dissipation to her character, Camaldry fit the description. Were she put on the throne, she would truly be in a position to devastate the galaxy, to say nothing of the Imperium itself. And there were suitable alternatives. "I gather our third will not be joining us this morning," she ventured. Her glass of sopka was empty, and if Lorem didn't have problems chasing Satora's killer, she certainly had a full docket of investigations to consider. The nobles were restless in her Imperial Highness's absence, and while none of them had become actively stupid, a very few had exercised poor judgment, which was where she came in. Lorem shrugged with her usual diffidence, though her eyes flickered to the display on the wall. It was almost 1 minute to their appointed time, and a chime sounded for admittance. Without breaking in her actions, Lorem swiped down on her pad, unlocking the door. Adam McGuinness, the human bride of Princess Indara Tassu, had aged with time. Grey streaks had appeared in his hair, which was said to be a telltale sign with humans. Regardless, he still moved with a casual grace as he crossed the room, setting his cup down on the table without preamble. "I hope I'm fashionably on time, ministers." The clock ticked over to the top of the hour. The entry was a trifle showy, but under the circumstances she was willing to indulge the prince. Settling into her chair and regarding their hostess, Oppenmeyer stifled a sigh of contentment. At long last, matters could be properly considered, as the Minister of Justice, the Minister of the Interior, and the Imperial Inquisitor. Finally, their trinity was complete.
Everybody knows the fight is fixed. The poor stay poor and the rich get rich. That's how it goes. Everybody knows.
Captain Satar slouched in her commissary chair, regarding Captain Solani Tonnis. "Anyway, that's the layout. I know it's going to be an early wake-up for you and your pod, but with Lieutenant Tala and her girls covering ops, we ought to be all hands on deck. That just leaves the motorcade." Tonnis was ending her shift, but the objective was only waking up. The best time for this talk was now. Captain Biona wasn't going to care, but everyone knew Solani had a stake in this. Warwick and Deshin wouldn't just be collateral damage if things went bad, and she needed to know if the woman's head was in the game. Indara's armoured limo will arrive to pick up Kalira while the APC with her defensive pod lingers around the entry and hooks up with R3. Captain Frelana and Pod 1 will then take point while the armoured limo picks up the painter party with Warwick, and the civilian transport for the girls takes off. They'll blend in part way until they get there, then arrive at the service row for the Northern Palace along with the bulk of our security. She pulled up the aerial map of the Northern Palace, keeping it zoomed on the grounds. No one is going to try anything funny at the main entrance, but we'll still have 2 APCs follow the limos in, anyway. Setar took a pull from her mug of tea. The plan was straightforward, as far as getting their assets in place. Once pods 1 to 8 were in position, their job was to interface with the pods working palace security. Mostly. Indara's crew had been designated Pod 9, and what they'd be up to was anyone's guess. That just gives me one question. Are you still up for riding with the objective? If you want Biona or my girls to take the slot, we understand. It's an easy swap, but I need to know now, Solani. Are you up for this?
Everybody knows that the boat is sinking. Everybody knows that the captain lied. Everybody got this broken feeling, like their mama or their dog just died.
Our service, Adam concluded with his usual candor, has found a lot of loose talk about empty picture frames. Honestly, the palace atmosphere stinks like last week's fish, and our service thinks it's down to Agent Zariva, but all of our service that's embedded thinks that's just the symptom. His Highness had been slow to adopt the necessary euphemisms, but he'd come around over time. One did not advocate an action as the Interior or Justice, nor even as the Inquisition. One did not name one's agents, nor sources. There was the service, as impersonal as the tide and just as implacable, but none of them truly operated without the other. That way lay anarchy. Still, if the prince had been distressingly slow to embrace the necessary idioms of his office, he at least performed his obligations with commendable zeal, and, over time, the former had fallen in line with the latter. Not gracefully, but you couldn't ask for everything. Our service! Oppermaya began her turn, savouring the portent of the moment as she sipped the fresh glass of sopkra. Is reporting restless elements amongst the more opportunistic elements of the nobility. While no one of consequence has been indiscreet, the circumstances have allowed certain elements to be detained. When necessary, information will be provided to your services, though at this time, our services' action would be premature, unless matters change with moves by Kalira's side tomorrow. Lorem Raelin didn't break stride in picking at a papaya. And yet, your service provided one of her side with writs of legal immunity. To ask where the Minister of the Interior had come across such information would be frivolous. Oppermaya didn't bother wasting anyone's time, but treated the remark with the regard it deserved, which was a slight. Yes, but one of the actors involved is not Shorvanti or well-connected. A minor sophistry, removing points of possible contention between her side and Camordri's. Of course, that was perfectly true, though she had some particular sympathy towards the Pezran involved. As an Adixi serving in the Shorvanti government, she knew how it felt to be trapped in the tide of events. Not often, to be sure, but she knew the feeling well. She pressed on before anyone else could muddy the waters. Our service is still concerned with the agent representing Princess Camordri's side, and wonders if she might be replaced. Our service? Lorem sighed, rather more expansively than was her usual wont to do, before continuing. Our service believes that could be premature. Oppermaya felt her tongue flicker over her inner row of teeth, as if tasting a bitter catch. Lorem's determination to refrain from actions against the will of the Empress was laudable. Over the last decade, she had been instrumental in working with the Inquisition and Justice alike to restrain the most visible hand of the Empress from its more ill-advised members. But that same temperance was beginning to feel excessive. Events would prove one of them right. Still, no one could deny that these were difficult times. Our service, she said judiciously, knowing these were dangerous waters, is curious as to why. The Inquisitor said very little at these meetings, and Adam set down his thermos of the vile-smelling concoction he favoured, though it seemed to function as well for him as Sopka. While that reticence had initially been a source of concern, The restored Inquisition had less reach than the Interior, and less mandate than Justice, though when it acted, it could be held accountable by neither. The reticence she had initially feared might cover a multitude of excesses had not proven true, though there had been rumours. Our service feels that, until the matter with Princess Satora is resolved, inciting additional ripples in the social fabric right now is inadvisable. Lorem kept her inflection mild. Perhaps it was called for. Our side is also aware that Princess Camaldry favours her personal agent. Removal would require answers. Her black eye slid over the Inquisitor, who sipped his drink without apparent concern. It was a lie, certainly. Adam McGuinness was reputedly as deadly as his wives, but he did have his tells. As small as they were, anyone with sense should know when there was blood in the water. Our service nearly lost. A valuable agent, tracking down the perpetrator, he said tightly. His hand was perhaps a bit whiter as he held his thermos. One always had to be sensitive when the blood was up. Our services may need to get off our collective butts. Oppenmeyer coughed. It wasn't loud, but it served to diffuse the moment. Strong feeling was the enemy of good judgment. That was something she knew perfectly well. Lorem unclasped her hands slowly. Our service believes events tomorrow may move things past the options of our service. It was a mild statement on the face of it, but Oppenmeyer had entertained milder requests for the death sentence from Lorem Raelin. Stated openly, it was tantamount to a seismic shift in the Interior's perspective. But unleashing the Inquisition should feel like nothing less.
Everybody talking to their pockets. Everybody wants a box of chocolates and a lawn stem rose. Everybody knows.
So much for the game. It was nearly breakfast, and their watch on morning security was close on his heels. Raikishi sighed as her omnipad skirled for attention, and paused in her throw to sheath her knife and shrug at Callus. Go ahead and take my turn. Padviri looked insufferably pleased, as she'd win again, but Callus was getting better. Her irritation turned to pleasure when she saw the caller ID, as she hastened to accept the connection before it failed. Zinchiki was her favourite sister, but her messages had tapered off lately. Well, hello, stranger. I wondered if you'd gone to ground. Zinchiki sounded her usual self. Raikishi, are you alone? No, just some target practice. You know how it is. She let her answer drawl out slowly. I can be, though. Yes. Typical Zinchiki, just typical. Never use a word more than necessary, but that was normal for everyone in the family, except Sunchaser. Sometimes she wondered how her aunt had survived. At least now she was old enough to talk to her mentor like an adult, but it was little wonder she spent so much time gossiping with other Pathfinders. If good conversation were meat, you'd starve to death around here. Still, that was where all the good gossip was. While no slouch with a dagger, Raikishi herself was focused on becoming their band's next Pathfinder. Zinchiki was the only one of their foursome that could give Pathviri any real competition, and their eldest sibling had become entirely too smug in her absence. Dropping out of the game wasn't exactly a loss of face, and she flipped Callus an apologetic look before slipping off. Right, I'm alone now. Where have you been? Busy. I wouldn't have guessed. Raikishi felt her Asaic stiffen with irritation. Dark Mother she loved her band sister, but at least her mother, Elesh, was a bit more chatty than Zinchiki's mother, Marraket. Regardless, they all loved their father and hung together. However trying that was. Pathviri could get damn prissy, and while Kalis was of age now, she could still behave like such a kit at times. Look, Can we get back to full sentences? I'm dying for some real news here. I need your advice. Raikishi's eyes narrowed, but she continued padding through their barracks towards her own cubicle without really answering. Sunchaser and the bandmothers had been quiet over the last few days, and if something was brewing, it would be easier to get Zenshiki to explain rather than trying to screw it out of her. Tugging the door to her dorm cube closed, she sprawled out on her bed. The barracks cubicle was roomier than on the ship, but it still felt wrong. Right, so I'm listening but not hearing a lot of talking. The silence on the line grew palpable. Raikishi was a patient hunter when it came to information. She checked her nails and waited. I have met a boy, Zenshiki offered, after an interminable wait. He may be a suitable mate. Raikishi nearly jumped out of bed and stared at her omnipad. It was a testament to Sunchaser's tutelage that she kept her voice carefully neutral. That's still not telling me the problem. Dark mother, she wanted to shout. A male for the family? Their age? An actual mate? Sunchaser hadn't said anything about it, but no wonder the bandmothers had been so quiet the last week. The other 3 warbands didn't have any boys their age, which would have meant finishing their contract and heading back towards Pesh, or some really clever long-distance negotiations. A boy, here, was huge. His name is past. Mother does not know about him yet. It has not been the right time. Raikishi stared at her omnipad as if it had grown feathers. More important than the boy? But if Zenshiki was sure, then why had the bandmothers gone quiet? I need more than that. Who is this mystery boy's family and why the big secret? That is the problem. He was a Rifagian, but he appears to be orphaned. He has no family. Zenshiki might have had less grace in her voice if her fur was being pulled out, but not by much. He is a free agent. Wait, you found a boy? A Persian boy? Our age? It bordered on disbelief, but Raikishi asked anyway. Without a contract attached. That is the problem, Zenshiki muttered. And when you explain what that is, then we'll both understand and maybe I can help. Raikishi felt her claws sliding out. Ice and fire, of course there had to be a string attached. Still, that was what Pathfinders were for. Quelling her excitement and her irritation alike, she calmed herself. And don't just sit there grumbling, I know you. Cough up the hairball in this brilliant scheme of yours. He was orphaned. I do not know the circumstances, only that he was raised by the Shovanti males after some point. Her sister hissed briefly over the line, before finally getting on with it. I have made the usual overtures, but he has unusual views. What? It was a stupid response, but the mind boggled. A Persian raised like a Shovanti male? It seemed ludicrous. Please don't tell me he curls his hair and wears a bow in his Asayak. Around his neck, Zenshiki growled out defensively. It is part of his uniform, though. Raikishi definitely felt like the galaxy was tilting to one side, but focused on the essentials. Free Mel covered a lot of ground. Finding a mate for their generation would not only earn Zenshiki the next seat with the bandmothers, it would give the Natasha dominance over every warband in the system. It would ensure their prosperity even this far from Pesh. While the Rifagian weren't a warband she knew, at least that also meant they were not enemies. She knew those. This would mean a reshuffling of the power politics between warbands for at least 1,000 light years, which meant a lot of work for any Pathfinder. Which also meant... Tark, mother! Will this finally get me laid? Her Asayak was thrashing, but she didn't care. Her sister needed help to land this prize, or she wouldn't have asked, and by the light she intended to help. Okay. Raikishi tried forcing her thoughts back into shape. This wasn't just big, this was huge. The number of variables in play here if she landed him. Okay, right. Okay? Are you okay? Zenshiki asked flatly. Yes, no, She reached back and got a grip of her Asayak and sat on it. How long have you known about this guy? Some time. Rikishi felt her Asayak spring out from under her and go taut, as she bit down the urge to claw her best sister's ears. You and I are really going to talk about the fundamentals of essential communication before you ever become a bandmother, or I swear I will end you in your sleep. Now, try big words again. What is the problem? He knows of our family holdings, but he has very odd ideas about property. Rikishi clawed the air as each word came out like it cost Zenshiki pain. I do not know what to get him as an offering to court him. Rikishi blinked. She blinked again, but at least her mind started turning over the problem. If the boy had Shilvanti sensibilities, it would need to be something expensive and gaudy and probably purple. And maybe taste nice. Who knew? There was a lot to be said for a good blue steak, but this was going to need some thought. Maybe something simple but elegant, like a personalized manicure kit with matching daggers. Maybe... Okay, I see your point. Who raises a peasant to think like a Shilvanti anyway? It was a polite question, instead of the more direct version, but she was the diplomatic one. You know of my Hakakt? Her sister said flatly. It wasn't a question. It didn't need to be. She got to the point quickly enough. Did you see the wedding video? Rikishi was already swiping through files on her desk Omni. Rikishi, did you... Hold on to your Asayak, will you? Ice and shards. Do you know how many people have commented on this thing? It says there's a freeway debate between the priestesses of Sham, Jarafel and Nyosa that's over 5 hours. Oh, wait, I found it. This looks like the original. So, what am I looking at? Forward the footage to the 37-minute mark and tell me what you see. Rikishi wanted to argue but knew how much good that would do. She swiped the file forward and looked. Alright, what am I? There. She spotted the male just below the stage and zoomed in. Then zoomed again. Oh. She felt her fur start to bristle and forgot all about her Asayak, running her tongue over one fang. Oh my. No wonder Zenshiki had stayed quiet. The male was sumptuous. If Pitviri got her claws into him first, there would be problems. Callis would probably try clawing his leg and swarming over him like... I get your point. Let's think this through together. One claw at a time until we figure out something appropriate, she said judiciously. His pelt reminds me of your mum.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows. That's how it goes. Everybody knows.
The early morning briefing was done, and Kadira Zariva watched Arissa Muifal as she left for her duties. It was their usual start to every day, and a time that usually centered her for the day ahead. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. But not today. The phantasm of her mother had been louder than ever. Her voice had grown stronger, insistent. A drunken background muttering in the recesses of her mind. She'd even seen the old bitch here and there, appearing in the distance. A shadow in the room, a reflection in the mirror. Right now, her mother was leaning against the other table, staring at her. The tide goes in, the tide goes... The spectre paused, slugging back a drink from a bottle of Blue Grail. Goes out. It was the drinking. That's what she remembered most as a child. The gambling losses had driven their family into bankruptcy, but it was the drinking that was visible. The strain of it all had driven her father to an early grave. Always the same stupid, slurred excuses when he'd asked her what was going on with the family accounts. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. That same look, plastered over her face when she blew him off, saying it would all be fine by next week, that she just had a run of bad luck. Excuse after miserable excuse, from a miserable excuse for a woman. The tide goes. Her hand slammed down on the desk as she glared at the apparition as she hissed, "Will you shut up?" Her mother, the hallucination. That's all it was, stress, leaned back and burped. "So, you do see me. It's about time." "I see a figment of my imagination pissing me off. Get out of my head or back into your grave, or just roll over in the trash where you belong. But whatever you do, shut up!" "Big tough girl. Tough girl," her mother leered. "You're stuck with all of us in that memory palace you're so proud of. Wonder what your girl Moifo thinks. Bet she thinks you're fucking it up. That you're a loser." "Moithal thinks what I tell her to think, and you'll do what I say too," Kadira snarled, as she gathered her omnipad and headed for the door. "I erased you from my life once. The only loser here is you." If her memory palace wanted a word, so be it. She'd kill her ghosts just as thoroughly as she created them. Tomorrow there would be Shell and this ridiculous farce, and then she'd enjoy her triumph in full. The drunken laughter followed her up the hall, long after anything real should have faded from hearing.
Everybody knows that it's now or never. Everybody knows that it's me or you. And everybody knows that you live forever when you've had a line or two.
Mevere watched Tom through lidded eyes. It was impossible to sleep, but for both their sakes she'd done her best to try. It was good to feel his body laying beside her, just the weight in the bed, the reassuring sense of presence when they woke up together. The prospect of losing all that yawned before her like an empty ocean. The worst part was having no one to share her fears with. While the goddess had brought people in and out of her life, she'd never been without anyone before. Even after Chanda and Amit died, she still had Shalaya. They'd been there for each other, even if it was only on a call in the still hours of the evening. Now, her circle of life was opening again, boys like a tide pool being filled and renewed with life. A husband in their lives again, as improbable as it had been. A daughter. To lose one would be a catastrophe. "Goddess, I can't even think about losing both." The only blessing about not being able to tell Shalaya was that today she would wake up and go about her day as normal, untroubled by unfolding events. Tomorrow was just a banquet, a function Tom was being drawn off to liaise with the Academy's human guests. She knew nothing of the terrible risks to their happiness. Mevere tried closing her eyes. Sleep wouldn't come, but she could just as easily imagine what Shalaya would have to say if she'd known. Her co-wife would tartly pick over every detail, no matter how small. Her voice would take on the working-class twang, the one she hated but always betrayed her when she grew irritated. Shalaya wouldn't get overtly upset. She'd never allow herself the luxury. But a bantam fury would be outlined in every curve of her face and the way she stood. She'd understand being excluded, but she'd be furious all the same. "We need to do something over winter break. Put some distance between us and the Academy as a family." Tom lay just beside her, propped up and listening to music. Giving up on sleep, she watched him in the dim semi-darkness that lingered in the hours before twilight. The screen of his omnipad was a sliver of light that backlit his face, and a moment of resentment washed over her. If he could just behave like a Shilvanti man for just once in his life. But courage was relative. Even a male Shilvanti would rise to a defense of the throne. In a torturous twist of logic, this was possibly the most Shilvanti thing Tom had ever done. It was ironic that he couldn't appreciate the cost. That was his human nature, and while she'd offered her prayers to Thoria never to see this again while he lay in the hospital, this time she could see the danger looming. This wasn't an assassin in the library. She was unaware of what was unfolding, and she was afraid. Every part of her wanted to take Leia's hand, interposing themselves to the danger. But that wasn't a luxury they were being afforded, any more than she could hold back the tide. She slipped her hand out to caress his chest, taking some solace in the cool warmth beneath her fingertips. Tom didn't startle, but turned off his music before rolling onto his side. "Can't sleep?" he asked lightly. Tom! What to say to that? That, of course, sleep was evading her, but that wouldn't help. She gazed at him in the darkness, well aware she could see him better than he could her. She studied the lines of his face as she draped her arm about his shoulder. "I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I need to know, Tom. Aren't you scared?" "I don't understand, Miv." Tom scooted around to face her, and for a moment she imagined seeing the eerie blue of his eyes. "I'm plenty scared. I just can't believe anyone would make a move with all the nobility coming to this thing. It's the safest place outside the academy." She drew a long breath, waking herself up, and tried pretending to herself that it wasn't a sigh. "Tom, I know you're human. I don't expect you to act like a Shilvanti man, but for a scared person, you're being so composed I could scream. What if you're wrong?" She felt his chest rise and fall under her hand as he drew a long breath. Thankfully, he didn't turn on the light. It would have made this conversation impossible. If she hadn't already spoken to Solani, it still would have been. She waited for an answer. Needed one. "Miv, I've seen death." Tom's voice rumbled as he whispered in the darkness. "No, I don't just mean the landing this time. I mean natural, accidental, pointless, deliberate, and now this wickedly contrived shit." "You mean the library?" she offered, even as she hugged him gently. "Partly." Tom's hand slid up to cover part of hers. "Whoever's finally found guilty, I'm willing to bet they're going to be daring, inventive, and extremely violent. People have died." "Admiral Tejo, Tom. She came after you and the girls. After Desi. You were trapped." "Not just Tejo. I think this includes Satora. Lamana Davari is pretty sure this goes back to some woman named Jurale Eterak, but I get the impression it may go farther still. Trust me, that woman scares me when her 'one time I was at band camp' mask comes off." Tom must have seen the cant of her head and sighed again. "Never mind, I'll explain later. The trail of blood for whoever's responsible is deep, and it has to stop. We can't just keep sitting back and taking shots. The longer this goes, the harder they're going to try, because they don't dare wait until the Empress gets back." "Can you at least be a little scared? For us?" It wasn't a fair question to ask a man. It wasn't a fair question to ask a husband, but her demand of Solani hadn't been fair either. If she had to wait on the sides while this unfolded, she was at least going to make her feelings clear. She was owed that much. "Trust me, love. I've got that part covered." She squeezed his hand and held him for a time, then rolled over in bed. She could pretend to sleep for a while longer. After a while, she heard him move about, messing with his omnipad before settling back in beside her.
"Everybody knows the deal is rotten. Old Black Joe's still picking cotton for your ribbons and bows. And everybody knows."
Marraket tapped her comlink to the ship and waited. Omnipads were fine for most things, but with their ship docked on the Duchess's estate, it provided an extra layer of security. Maybe that was being paranoid, but there were questions in her mind about the Rafagian that would need to be answered. And just at the moment, the Duchess was as good a target for her irritation as anything. It was perfectly fine to keep secrets, within reason, and as long as they were paid for any hazards that might entail. There would have to be a discussion about that, but not now. She glowered down at the comlink and waited. Sunchaser's name was at least partly ironic. The woman was up at all hours of the night, and the Dark Mother only knew when she slept. She seemed content to live half her life in her room adjoining their comm server, trading shadowed secrets and veiled whispers with other warbands. For all the woman's perpetual banter, when all was said and done, far more was spoken than was actually said, even to the bandmothers. Sunchaser kept her own counsel, jealously guarding her secrets away. Marraket was never certain if she approved more than she was annoyed. Regardless, she was prepared to call as many times as need be to poke Sunchaser in her den. She had watched with Seraph, Gandalf, and 3 of the girls this morning. She wasn't prepared to wait. Thankfully, Sunchaser connected.
Mara, Dark Mother, do you know what time it is? Always.
Something clattered, and Sunchaser grumbled out a curse.
Yeah, fine, I get it. Just because I watched the ship, you don't have to call me before the crack of dawn. You were awake. We both know it,
Marraket replied flatly, taking some pleasure in yanking her aside, even at a distance.
Bite me. Lefkier had a bad night. That prosthetic he's wearing is causing him more pain than it helps, but it isn't stopping him from hobbling all over the ship when he gets the idea he needs to help me.
Sunchaser muttered quietly over the link.
I'm the only one on the ship with him half the time, and he's just mobile enough to make me pull my hair out.
Marraket felt a momentary twinge of sympathy, but only that. Sunchaser was a capable woman, and the only one of the warband not married to their husband, who could put him in his place. She'd survive. The contract was what mattered. The contract kept them paid, fed, and alive another day. Well, the contract, then other affairs.
Did you find out? Would it kill you to engage in some small talk now and then? I mean casual, not monosyllabic. Good morning, Sunchaser. How are you? Hey, we killed something nice and left some in the kitchen for you.
Sunchaser groused. Marraket let her get it out of her system. It was the Pathfinder's second favourite thing. The first being,
Of course I found out. Well, mostly. I've got the scent of the thing anyway. Greatvel of the Marakatan finally got back to me. And let me tell you, that woman is no better than she ought to be considering her warband. They've been sitting on their current contract for over 7 local years. And Stargazer, you know, Stargazer in the Chukatat, she thinks they're getting soft, working...
Gossip. The woman loved to gossip. Elesh was very proud of her daughter wanting to follow in Sunchaser's path, professionally, which was a gift from the Dark Mother. On an operation, they'd probably strangle the child. Eventually, Sunchaser worked it out of her system. It was faster than usual. She must actually be tired.
So, do you want to know or not?
Yes. Rather than endure a fresh round of complaints, she added,
Please. Fine. Greatvel said the Rivagian had a line going with our Duchess, all right, but their big sideline was running weapons out to that place you told me about. The tide pool? Not just light stuff either. If they kept a fraction of the stuff, that place has more bites than a Iraqian centipede.
There was the sound of Sunchaser rummaging about, but by this time, any hint of ire was banished. The woman practically pounced with her news.
And the interesting bit is they're closing down tomorrow. Pretty much all around the same time the Northern Palace is throwing this big shindig for those humans, camped out at Zinjiki School. The thing is all over the local newsfeed. And my daughter hasn't said a word to me. That's good operational security. Fine. Call in my markers, she said flatly, her aside twitching in irritation. When the other bandmothers wake, I want a family deployment. What? To the tide pool? No. We are going to this event. Find out the details for me as soon as you can. At least now she was speaking as bandmother to Pathfinder. I want a perimeter watch to see what happens. Oh, I figured you'd say that. Shocking that I grabbed onto Duchess Eilena's invitation. Want me to RSVP? Sunchaser was practically purring. You love me. Admit it.
Everybody knows you love me, baby. Everybody knows that you really do. Everybody knows that you've been faithful, give or take a night or two.
Tom slipped a hand down to his omnipad and looked at the time. While he usually enjoyed laying in, his mind had been busy, and it had been precious little comfort this morning. He lay back and ran his hand down Mavere's arm.
Everybody knows you've been discreet. So many people you just had to meet without your clothes. And everybody...
He turned off the music and spooned against Miv. It would be time to get up soon. Desi woke with a start, her omnipad ringing in her ear, and nearly fell out of bed. The pad slipped out of her fingers and fell on the floor as she fumbled around. Another night of half sleep, if that. Another night spent diving down through compartmentalized records on the invasion of Earth. Another night of secrets she couldn't speak, learning things she never wanted to learn. She pried one eye open long enough to stare balefully at the text on the screen.
This must be what Father means by fight or flight. Goddess, if I don't get a full night's sleep tonight, I'm going to kill her.
The message was shining up at her cheerfully. She could remember being a morning person. It was only last week. It just felt like last year.
MS. Breakfast. Let's talk about what we're wearing later, okay? And don't forget we're going out for a drink tonight. Mel. I swear she's going to be the death of me.